Knoblox Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production and social media. Hey knowers, welcome to our podcast. We are Knoblox Dance, a social media-based company. We strive to say no to the box. We connect interdisciplinary art, technology, and artists to re-envision the process of art making and sharing.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. We're your co-hosts, Azaria
and Yejin.
And today we spoke with the award-winning performer, choreographer, and teacher, Keith Hennessy.
Yay!
So if you don't know, Keith directs the company Circo Zero. He's interested in queer dance and working with people of color, contact improvisation. He's worked with numerous collaborators, including Meg Stewart, Peaches, Scott Wells, and has won a numerous amount of awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, Bessie Awards, Isadora Duncan Dance Awards, and the list just goes on and on.
Yeah, on this episode, we talked about what is queer dance means to him and the culture of contact improvisation and his current interests. And also, we asked those two questions and then answer among all three together. Is contact improv sexy or not? Have you met the contact improv dancers whose romantic partners are jealous of the dancing? So I think it's really interesting questions, and you can hear the answers.
Yes, it was such a pleasure speaking with him, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Enjoy it!
All right. Hello, Keith. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm happy. It's a good day.
Good. How have you been holding up with quarantine and COVID-19 in your company?
I mean, of course, it's fucking weird and strange every day. And not a life that I've ever lived before. But, you know, my day-to-day is not so terrible. I live in San Francisco. I live in a community land trust building that's a co-op with 5 other apartments, and we have a lot of mutual aid and support for each other and shared food and who's got ginger, and some of us are doing extra fun projects with the 9-year-old who lives in our building, and we call it homeschooling.
Awesome.
So I'm making a dance in my backyard with a 9-year-old.
I love that.
Lovely.
Yeah. So yeah, things are pretty good. I mean, everything's weird. The whole money situation where suddenly thousands and tens of thousands of artists across the country were all writing relief grants. Many of them that we were never going to get in the first place because of inadequate funding, because the government bailouts went to super wealthy corporations and not to small nonprofits, you know, just the usual games. But I would love to, when this is over, to have it documented, like literally thousands and thousands of, tens of thousands of wasted hours of artists who, instead of making something, wrote relief grants to try to cover their rent. And they wrote grants to sources of money that did not exist. Of the, I think, 5 or 6 grants we wrote in the first week, most of them we did not hear back from. We know those funds are gone.
Right.
And I think 2 days ago, we got 1 grant for $10,000. And that's just money that we're redirecting to 10 Black and Indigenous artists based in the Bay Area.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, what we did was we tried to write grants that, not just for ourselves, but to redirect to people who don't have their own organizations or institutions backing them, which is our biggest community, in a sense, is independent artists.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we got 1 for $10,000, which means we sent $1,000 to 10 people, which is cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it's not real money.
Right. It scratches the surface, but I mean, it's better than nothing.
Right.
Oh,
Maybe we can come back around to grant writing and that process. I don't know that I want to talk about grant writing, but it's important right now. And maybe some
it's
other
less about
people.
grant writing. Yeah. It's less about grant writing and more about how do we see ourselves in larger, which is a big part of my work, is like, how do we see our dancing and our individual bodies or our personal subjectivity within these larger structural frames? Like, are we an economy? Is dancing, is a podcast about dance part of an economy? Like when we start to create content and in a sense contribute to the world through embodied activity and imagination and discourse, it's like, how are we participating in that world? So that's where these larger structures and money talk become part of the work for me.
Especially in this pandemic, social media has been helping a lot, sharing dance and teaching dance. Do you have any other tips or any kind of thoughts how social media has been helping, especially in this situation in dance world?
Yeah, I'm a little bit resistant to the online dancing, I have to say. Mm-hmm. I've taken some yoga classes, but the idea of dancing with everyone in the little boxes just totally does not work for me.
I'm glad you said that too, because I feel like I've been crazy. I know everyone's in it, and I'm so glad that some people are doing that, and I know some people need it, but I've had a really, really hard time with exactly what you said. And I've done the same thing. I can do yoga, I can do like conditioning of the body, but it's something about being through this box that is difficult.
Right.
Yeah. I've tried a bunch of things. There's some very simple exercises that I've been just starting to offer. I haven't myself, I've turned down the online teaching jobs that have been offered me, like where it's just a one class here or there. Mm-hmm. I did try one project, which was only leaving your arm in the screen and then starting to pick up movement from another person. Like, so now pretend you're now improvising with me. So you could copy me, you could comment, you could respond. For those people who can't see us, our arms are in the camera, and somehow this limited frame of only the arm and the hand in the frame became something actually manageable, whereas the whole body seemed too far away to both look and dance at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the other exercise that I've been doing online that I got, it's some new age meditation called We Space meditation. I did this kind of queer men's retreat online, and it was everything from, a yoga class, a qigong class, workshops about your ancestors, all the way to like massive self-pleasuring with 70 men, touching themselves sexually on Zoom. And you're like, really? How is this going to? But in that retreat, there was an exercise where you put only your face and your hands in the camera. And there was this way where you just did very basic leading and following exercises. And it became so intimate. Like just move your hands for a minute and I'll copy you. Or are we in a glitch? Yeah. We're in a slight time glitch, so we can't see it as easily. But what worked for the exercise is that you cannot eye gaze on the computer. We cannot look each other in the eye. Mm-hmm. Because in the body, the camera and the receiver are two different mechanisms. So whereas on the body, the camera is the eye. So it's what's receiving and what is giving the eye contact. Mm. But with the computer, we separate these two basic functions. Mm. So if I look at the computer, I cannot look at you. And if I look at you, you cannot look in my eye. And so this we space meditation has been a way to try to figure out, can we have the intimacy of eye gazing and still use the Zoom, still practice some kind of social distancing? So I'm very interested in this kind of like, I don't know, computer experimentation of like, what's the next level of actual feeling each other through the medium of the Zoom.
What does queer dance means to you? I know it's like big question, but you're experts, so could you share your ideas with us, please?
About what queer is?
Yeah, what does queer dance means to you?
You are listening to Knobbox Dance.
I mean, I think it's always shifting. Like, I'm old enough that I think we're in our third sort of generation of queer or something, maybe fourth. So, you know, I'm 60, and I think for people my age who were very active in social justice politics in the 80s and 90s, we experienced a kind of emergence of a new word that did something that gay didn't. Not just as an identity, but as a new way of thinking about LGBTQ people's relationship to society at large. And there was something a bit more punk about it. There was something a bit more resistant about it, or what we used to say in those days, anti-assimilationist. Whereas maybe gay was an assimilationist value, like how could we become productive members of society? Whereas queer embodied a certain kind of anti-capitalism, or what today has become even more of a decolonial anti-capitalism. So it's not just an idea, like the notion of queer was an effort to destabilize the centrality of white men in the gay movement and to open up a much broader frame. Whereas today, I think a lot has happened since the late 80s and the emergence of a new kind of queer politics. And one of the things that's happened is the making academic of queer. I've been part of that, but I'm also ambivalent of it. Like what happens when queer becomes, starts to be treated like a fixed theoretical term. And then, we all start to use it as a verb, like to queer something is to unsettle it, is to look at the heteronormativity of a situation and present alternatives to it. I think today queering is very much about disrupting binaries, right? And I would say trans and non-binary people, and especially QPOC, are really at the foreground of who's using queer, who's making queer something new today. And then, I've been joking, like, if someone sets up a queer space, or what they're calling a queer space, or especially if it's supposed to be a queer safe space, kind of the last person they imagine to enter the room is me, if they were using their imagination. They'd be like, the last person we expect to walk into this room is someone 60, male, white, presenting cis, and then you're like, okay, so what is queer? Is it a young person's game? Is it like, how do we age in a sense with things that come from punk and disruption, right?
Right.
Do we expect the person who walks into the queer space to be supporting themselves as an artist, and after 35 years of unstable housing lives in stable housing and can no longer be evicted? Like, I don't hold the economic precarious positions of a queer.
Right.
So that's when we start to feel like queer is actually a much bigger term than anything that's just about gender and sexuality.
Right.
But it's always about positioning in society. And
how does that transcribe into your dance making? Because I know that activism is central. So I guess it's a two-part question. How does that translate to your dance making? And also, I'm very curious about how you even gained this interest in combining the two?
Yeah, I would say in the dancing, what's going on for me is that for the last several years, I have felt like the only place of generative tension has been in collaborating across lines of difference, right? So who am I not? And what are the relationships that seem the most stressed in our society? And then what does it mean to then improvise across lines of power? And we're in a very particular moment, I think, around with identity politics, where it's easier in a sense to segregate and to reconsolidate within smaller identity groups and micro identities. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, what's the role of a white person then in that context? Clearly, it's not only to make dances with white men, even though there is a lot of work for white men to do to figure out how white masculinity is functioning in the world and how it might be turned. So yeah, I think the way that I've been thinking through queer in my work has been about, instead of like queer meaning gay, so that me partnering with a person who's like me, right? Mm-hmm. Same gender or same culture. I think the queerest thing I can do is collaborate with people who are not like me. Mm. And whether that's about them being not white, whereas I'm white, or them being younger, where I'm not younger, them being trans, where I'm read as cis. And you'll notice that I don't actually identify as cisgender unless it's necessary. Because again, I think it's, you know, as a friend was joking, it's like the new binary is, are you binary or non-binary?
Right.
And what's weird is that if you're someone like me or like older dykes and older, you know, queer men, it's like we've been resistant to normative modes of gender for 40 years. Mm-hmm. Like I wore a dress and skateboarded around San Francisco, you know, constantly in the 80s. So the notion that I'm cisgender just doesn't feel right, especially when it starts to be used as a derogatory or as a new way to separate. But I understand that within certain kinds of trans discourse, I'm cisgender, and that's fine. It's like, I just think it's a limited frame for me to identify with. So anyway, that was a distraction. But when it comes into the dancing, yes, I'm thinking about queer as if queer is about social relationships that are outside of the mainstream, then it seems like one of the queerest things we can do is multi-generational collaboration, or cross-racial or cross-cultural collaboration, or cross-gender collaboration, like working with people with whom we don't share the same subjectivity. So a lot of my work in the last several years has been about looking for what I call unlikely collaborations, and then trying to think through horizontal power sharing. So how do we improvise? How do we make decisions together while dancing together, and have the dancing be the site of the political exchange or the political economy?
That's a beautiful definition. I love that kind of framework that you just set for us. Mm-hmm. Also, going to contact improvisation, we are both practitioners, and I think in our education, I remember watching my first Keith Hennessy video in grad school. I think it was Turbulence. Really got me stirring there. You remember that? I don't know if we were in the same class then, Jen. Yeah. But I'm also curious about this sense of normativity and whiteness. You have a quote from the Questioning Contact Improvisation where you say, how the social context of CI remain predominantly white and heterosexual despite the radical potential of dancing in the utopian intention and progressive self-perception of many CI dancers. So I'm just curious about how you're still taking this maybe idea of queerness to break down normativity and whiteness within contact improvisation when it's not necessarily your creative work. That's set, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think this question is important for pretty much all of the alternative culture contexts and movements that have, that sort of come out of the 60s and 70s where white people predominate. It's like we could ask the same question about Burning Man, about yoga in America, about Tantra, right? Like, why are these things that people, and this was true. There's a really excellent book about dancing in the rave scene by Arun Saldanha. I probably am not saying Arun's last name correctly, but the book is called Psychedelic White, and it looks at. It's a very similar study to what I did, whereas I was looking at contact improvisation and how it grew from the 70s. Arun is looking at the Goa rave scene. So, and not just in Goa, although particularly in Goa, but also how a particular rave scene spread. And what's common about these movements is they're really seen as this kind of universal thing, like that the dancing body will defy all barriers, that we're all one on the dance floor, kind of, ideologies and mythologies. And then what Arun looks at and what I looked at in Contact is, if it's true that this is the dance for all people,
we're all the people.
Where are all the people?
Yeah.
And, we were just in this, and there's a number of people who are working on this from a different angle than I am. I think, partly because I'm white and generationally who I am, my research on racism in alternative culture movements and specifically Contact looked a lot at the reproduction of whiteness. That's when it's not intentional, when people think what they're doing is making a radical, inclusive space and not literally, like, we do all this work, this somatic awareness work in contemporary dance and Contact, but somehow these awareness practices don't shift from my body to your body and then to system-wide awareness and study. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to push for is a somatic experiencing, a somatic body awarenessing that is not restricted to the personal body, or what I would call the neoliberal body, right? The body that's only concerned with itself or that thinks it's the only responsible thing. But can we become somatically attuned to the temporary community in the room, to the politics of the space, to how money flows, to how race is actually produced in the space, not just reflected in the space.
Right.
You impose a lot of questions and questioning contact improvisation, and we brought those questions. Perhaps we can answer those questions together. The three questions we brought is contact improv sexy or not? Second one is, have you met the contact improv dancers whose romantic partners are jealous of the dancing? So perhaps like two, sorry.
Are we going to answer these together? Can we start with, is it sexy or not? Maybe we can say it on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. No.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know. I don't think we did a good job.
I say yes and no.
I think it's what you make it.
Sure, but I mean, what's sexy, of course, but
right.
If it's pleasurable in the body relating to another person, where's the boundary of that with the sexy?
Could it be sensual and not sexy?
Right. So is there a difference between those two words, and what do they mean? I don't know. I don't think that's not a clear line between those two words. I think that's a space.
Right.
Like I sometimes call this is like swamp theory, right? There are times when a border is a line, and there's times when a border between the land and the water is a swamp.
Mm.
And I think contact improv fits into swamp theory. So, and the thing about the swamp is that many people can gather there. So many kinds of animals that might, like you could have the freshwater fish and the saltwater. You could have these animals that just drop in to visit, certain plants that live. So it's a very fertile space, but it's not a clearly defined place. And I think what I like about a provocation of Is It Sexy is that clearly a lot of people like to build affinity and friendship around contact. And I think there's always something like in the larger way that we might think through the erotic, I think there's something erotic about building friendly relationships through touch and weight. And one of the reasons that there are people who get hurt in contact, like around abuse of power, around inappropriate touch, is because there's this idea that the dance really could be separated from sensuality and not trigger romantic notions or not trigger like heterosexual norms of touch. And I think that if we foreground, actually there is an erotic potential here of bodies being in space together, then we could actually have a more frank discussion about what safety for all the people would look like in that space, what consent would look like in that space. So that's why I like the provocation about it being sexy or not, and knowing that the answer wouldn't be consistent across the board.
Well, in Korea, sexy, I'm from Korea, we say Konglish, Korean, plus English. So sexy means in Korea is like attractive. So it's like less sexual, but like we use like, oh, you're beautiful. We can also say like you're sexy. And
so then from a Korean perspective, would contact be sexy?
I think so.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
I remember I shared my first contact improv jam video with my mom, and she's from Korea, South Korea, really conservative. And she told me, I'm sorry, I know it's podcast, but she said like, okay, what are you doing there? I thought you're like studying your dance in the United States to get your degree. And then she said, is there like group sex or something? So I think it's, it's like her perspective, who doesn't know about like contact improv. So also it depends on the audience too, like how much knowledge they have about contact. Yeah.
But I think this leads directly to the next question, right? Which is about the jealous partner.
Right.
And I have met many people who have had this experience. I even know people who their partners don't want them doing contact. And that's seeing it from the same perspective as your mother, right? Which is, and I tried to think about this in the writing of my dissertation, which became the zine, which is, we grow up with a certain code of touch. We see certain kinds of touch and we associate certain things with them. And there are many things that happen in contact improv and the intimacy of two bodies together that many people only understand that kind of intimacy as sexual. So we might enter it from this, oh no, we're just being aware of our body, and now it's the physics of the movement, and we're working with momentum and weight and these very practical physical terms. But one is that it does activate chemical things in the body. Like I say, the erotic or the pleasure, but even the imagination, like what it means to suddenly be supported when upside down, and that experience that you just had was facilitated through the actual physical contact with another person. So you're having a physical and a chemical experience. And then, as we say, like you come from a, not even super traditional, but you come from even what we might even think of as typical Asian experience. And you're like, that looks like sex or some strange animal behavior that I don't know. But the truth is, that just happens also for all kinds of people, like, gay and straight who are involved in a certain kind of idea about what the romantic partnership looks like physically, and then they see contact and they're like, that looks at least as intimate as some of the sex we've had. And so what are you doing? And I find this tension super interesting. It's problematic. It's a reflection of how radical, in a sense, the dance actually is, that we can actually enter it through these ideas about body awareness and dancing, and actually find a way to be this close physically to another person and separate it from the romantic and or the sexual. Like that to me is something really amazing. Like we really are creating new forms of relationship.
So just to kind of shift gears a little bit, you've talked a little bit about how you envision queer and dance now. I'm just curious about what are some of your big research topics now? What is really making you tick, and what are your research dance interests?
Good question. I think I was already on a certain track for the last year and a half where I felt like I wasn't doing it in my work, but I was slowly researching what would be the next sort of point of focus. And I was thinking that it was around rethinking intimacy and intimacy as a political project, and trying to link intimacy to empathy to solidarity, and how we might look at, like, you know, I've been pretty obsessed for a number of years since before Trump, but it's definitely escalated with Trump, is thinking about how polarized every political discussion seems to be, every election seems to be. And so I've been thinking, like, okay, people, it's very easy for people now to shut other groups of people off. Like, these people are deplorable, and these people are liberal, and these people are good, and these people are bad, and these immigrants, I'd rather they be dead. You know, like very extreme forms of separation around political positions. And so I've been trying to understand, like, what would bring solidarity back? How would we rebuild communities, in a sense, around difference? And I've been turned on to some, you know, different thinking around what fascism is. So I've been thinking about the rise of right-wing politics and how that impacts the body. Like, what new fears are we embodying? What new fears of each other are we embodying? So I've been doing this dance meditation for the last couple of years that I call anti-fascist meditation. And they're really just empathy scores. Like, how do we feel together with someone through the dancing? So it's been a lot about slowing dancing way down, doing mutual following scores, where we're really just trying to be in the shared movement. It's less about touch, partly because the contact vocabulary starts to seem really culturally specific to a lot of people. It reads as either white or as college dance. And so, yeah. So I was already on this track, right? Like, how do we dance with someone where we're actually building empathy, and where does the empathy that we build, where might that be a model for new kinds of solidarity? So I was on that track. And now I think with Corona,
I was just
and the physical, and the physical and social distancing that Corona is making, I'm super interested right now about what is the next round of touch going to look like.
Exactly.
Who's going to be afraid of the contact jam because it's just like, that's too much of a germ pool? Like, no.
Well, as we wrap up, we have something called our Flash 4 portion, where we ask all of our guests to answer four questions in a flash. So as fast as possible. We can elaborate maybe if we need to, but we're just gonna get to it. Are you ready?
Ready.
Flash 4.
Okay. If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
Watch Crip Camp.
Crip Camp. Okay.
What was the first dance you saw?
Ask again.
What was your first dance you saw?
Saturday Night Fever.
Do you think that social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
I don't want to do yes or no because it's way too complicated. I think it's both positive and negative, although I have to say overall positive. The positive wins, but it's not only positive. I can't do this one quickly, sorry.
What is your favorite social media platform?
None.
Okay, cool.
Fair.
Yes, I really want to hear your opinion. If your time allows, can you explain more about the positive influence on the dance world you said?
Of social media?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the idea that all the dancing in the world is available on YouTube, I mean, I just can't put that in the negative category. It's just too amazing. And that people all over the world are not only learning dance from computers, but they're building relationships and new embodiments and through the computer. And this was before Corona and Zoom classes,
Yeah.
right? This is just the trajectory that we went, like YouTube was already a revolutionary shift in dance. I come from a generation where it didn't matter how many dance books there were in the world. There's fewer dance books than theater books, fewer dance books, of course, than visual art, than poetry, than any other art form. And dance really has relied on body-to-body transmission in real time, in studios, in the street, in the club. That is the history of dance. And YouTube radically changed that. That can't be only positive. That's also digital mediation of the body-to-body experience, but it's also, I think we need to see the computer and YouTube as also part of a cyborg. Like the body changed from YouTube, the dancing body changed. And again, there's lots of positive to that, but it's also complicated. What it means that my body, and as we're speaking right now, it's happening. We're having a real-time experience of each other, and we are also heavily mediated by this digital glitch culture that is technology. So I think YouTube made a massive consciousness and embodiment shift in the history of dance. And then we were sort of there for a moment, even though the content was building up. I think Facebook did something, but Facebook I don't think was as powerful a shift to dance as what happened with all the micro video platforms. Instagram sort of rising to the top of that, and now TikTok, right? Where even what we think of as the attention span of dance and the notion of the 30-second dance and the 50-second dance and even the GIFs of dance that are like 1 to 2 seconds. This has really shifted what we think of as the choreographic, as embodiment,
right,
as dancing. So again, it's like, I can't only say positive. I think it is amazing and remarkable that the dancing body is now a cyborg. The dancing body includes the camera, the phone, the computer, the tablet. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. I have made very little work even for video. Primarily the video of my work is documentation video. My entire life is dedicated to the practices and the rituals of coming together in a room to experience bodies in motion. That's my jam. That's what I do. There's no computer that's ever going to replace that. And I like to remind people of that. So, I'm rehearsing with a 9-year-old in my backyard. We're in real time making a dance without touching each other. But at the same time, when she's not with me, she's up taking a Zoom class with her Girl Brigade, with the local dance, company called Dance Brigade. Then she's on TikTok learning new 40-second dances. And I think that's all amazing. And she is the, part of this new dance cyborgian embodiment. So again, it's more like I'm curious about it and I'm critical of it, but I'm not against it.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was such a pleasure speaking with you today, Keith. This was awesome.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.